which you've seen a very concerted effort, at least on the gun control side of things, to advance that argument that foreign countries are being harmed by American products, which will sort of segue us into our final story that we're going to talk about that you reported on. And that's the Biden administration's ongoing pause on granting new licenses to the Commerce Department for gun companies to export their firearms under the similar logic that sometimes gun industry products in the United States gun industry are facilitating, crime or other misdeeds abroad. And now we have a new letter from some Democratic lawmakers that seeking the Biden administration not only to extend that pause, but to sort of crack down on the practice altogether. If you want to talk about what your reporting found.
Yeah. And in addition to that, we have some prominent Republicans who are pushing back in the opposite direction, right? Who think it's an attack on the Second Amendment, which is kind of an interesting claim, given that these are firearms exports. And I think there's probably less protection for that work in the Second Amendment than, perhaps domestic sales but it'll be interesting to see how this works out in the courts if there is a case. But yeah, essentially the Biden administration has paused exports of certain kinds of guns, at least. Really they seem to be trying to go after so-called assault weapons, AR-15s and similar firearms with this regulation, but the export of them instead of internal sales. And they paused that except for certain countries that are in what's called the Wassenaar Agreement, which is a an arms trade treaty and then also they've exempted like Israel and Ukraine in theory, but excuse me, every week,
every time.
I don't know how to. There's like no way to prevent it. I don't know. Once you talk long enough, it happens. Anyway, sorry about that. Yeah, so they paused all export licensing. So people are still operating under old licenses because they are good for 4 years or up to a certain quantity or what have you. But during that time, they've exempted some of these other countries. However, we published a leaked draft of what the Commerce Department wants to put in place permanently as new rules. And that would eliminate some of these exemptions, in particular for Ukraine and Israel, which are two obviously global hotspots, very politically contentious at the moment, with armed guns going there, whether as military aid or in this case for civilian sale, because Ukraine and Israel have both loosened their strict gun laws in the wake of the attacks that they've seen. And so there are more people being able to actually buy American-made guns now than before. But at the same time, the administration seems poised to clamp down on that. Now, the Commerce Department has said that this is not a final rule, that they haven't made any final decisions. The pause also, while it says 90 days, which should have run out already, they noted when I reached out to them that they actually wrote approximately 90 days. So I guess there's no clear end of when this pause is going to stop, and they're going to announce whatever replacement they come up with, whether it's the draft that we leaked or some sort of revision of that. I would be surprised if it wasn't very close to the draft that we published. But, this has driven a lot of controversy in the gun industry. But, of course, there are supporters for it as well in the Democratic Party, although there was only 4 Democrats on that letter that you mentioned being sent to the Commerce Department, where they want the pause to be extended, and they want a bunch of new restrictions, some of them included in this draft proposal, some of them not. Things like even having Commerce stop working with the industry sort of directly, like they don't want them to go to SHOT Show anymore, which is where I just was. And they don't want them to. They want them to be very strict as to what guns get exported to Israel in particular as well. And yeah, they explicitly blame American gun companies for violence in other countries, sometimes citing specific examples like the Thailand mass shooting that a police officer carried out a couple of years, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. I think it was 2022. And, saying that he used an American-made gun. Of course, he was a police officer at the time, or that's why he was able to buy guns, as far as my understanding of that incident. But they also sort of point to just general increase in violence as well. So it's not just specific incidents that they're noting for why American exports of firearms need to be restricted further. But I actually talked to an exporter at SHOT Show. Were you able to read that piece?
I was going to say, yeah, I saw you had a members piece. Members can read it right now, obviously, detailing basically he kind of talked to you about the practical implications of what the Commerce Department was pursuing. And it was very interesting, the fact that he thought it would have a devastating impact on his ability to operate.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to think that it would basically put him out of business, or at least come close to doing that. He said,
right.
And I thought it was important to actually talk to somebody directly affected by the ban, because it can be very dry and academic in some sense. I mean, we're talking about export controls and stuff, but the reality is it has a big impact on a lot of gun industry members. So, obviously exporters like Jordan Young, who's CEO of Global Defense, that's the interview I did, and there's a members piece on that. But also a lot of the sort of mid to small size manufacturers, gun manufacturers. He works with 20 brands, people like Aero Precision and Volquestrin and Zev, some relatively well-known but not huge brands. And he was arguing that those are the kind of companies that are going to have a big problem if this proposal becomes law, because a lot more of their businesses rely on exports. I spoke to one manufacturer that he works with, and he said, he manufactures all sorts of things. I think mainly furniture, but he also does firearms, and it makes up like 20-30% of his business, and they're mostly for export. If they can't get export licenses, they can't make sales. Like, their businesses are going to basically shrink or go away altogether. I mean, Young's business is 50% exports, 50% imports. He thinks they're going to move to imports next, there's no particular reason why they wouldn't, under the same concept that they're talking about. But he called the proposal unworkable, especially the part where they are trying to require exporters to get end users identification. So whoever is the individual person buying the gun in another country, the exporter would have to obtain copies of their passport or something similar in order to sell them a gun. And that would radically change how things work right now, because basically the way it works is you get a license to export to somebody in that country who's an importer, and they have to be licensed in their country and follow the laws of the country that they're in, and handle everything on that end. And now it would be on the responsibility of exporters to do that, to really kind of create and manage a gun registry for foreign countries, for people who buy the American imports, which is a pretty wild concept, honestly. It's something we don't even do here in the United States. If you sell a gun in the United States, you aren't required to collect somebody's personal information. That's something the dealers do, not the gun exporter, not the gun company or the wholesaler. So he said it would be unworkable, and it just basically would put him out of business.